At least 50 Palestinians have been killed in clashes with Israeli forces. Hundreds of others are wounded. It comes as the U.S. opens its embassy in Jerusalem. Israeli security officials have blamed Hamas for the violence. It is the deadliest since demonstrations began more than 6 weeks ago. Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas has condemned what he describes as the massacre of the people. The Israeli Defense Forces claim there are around 35,000 protesters gathered at the border fence between Israel and Gaza.
Hamas is using the demonstrators, the unarmed people that are participating here, and are sending them forward. We've seen women and children being sent forward in order to tear down the fence, for a second wave of terrorists to get inside and run for the nearest Israeli community. That is a risk that the IDF, cannot tolerate and will not tolerate, and we have been very clear about that in the past, that we will not allow it. Now, we've been relying heavily on less lethal weapons. We've been using tear gas, and we've been calling out in Arabic, and we have done different things in order to prevent this specific situation.
Well, let's get you a feel of the tensions there and more on that violence in Gaza. I'm joined by CGTN's Adel Mahroui, who is at the Israeli-Palestinian border. He's joining me now on phone. Adel, it's been such a devastating day for Palestinians. What's the latest on the casualty figures and the day-long protests?
The number of casualties is expected to grow, especially as Palestinian health authorities are taking care of those severely wounded. But what has been, as you said, a devastating day for Palestinians in just one day, the number of casualties, the death toll, have almost approached the numbers of all casualties in the previous 7 to 8 weeks when the protests began. So it's definitely the bloodiest day Gaza has seen in many, many weeks. And it seems that this is just the beginning. Palestinians are still determined to continue their march to the borders again tomorrow to mark the day where they commemorate 70 years under the Israeli occupation. So it has been an immense day, huge protest. All age groups have been attending here at the border, and they are still determined to come again tomorrow.
Adel, so the U.S. Embassy is now relocated to Jerusalem. So how much longer, though, are these protests likely to continue? What are you seeing on the ground?
People are furious about the U.S. Embassy, and they believe that it is a further violation to their rights. They have been already trying here in Gaza under Hamas. They've been trying to take a step back to accept being part of a unity government and start peace talks to recognize the 1967 borders. And they have a feel that such steps that they've taken has made it to extend its presence and have a stronger situation on the ground itself. That's what has been circulating among the people. They are at least planning to continue for tomorrow, definitely on the Nakba Day. May 15th is a very crucial day and has always been one of the biggest protests here in Gaza. It started early because of the U.S. Embassy move. Many people are claiming that they are willing to continue these protests. They believe it's a new wave of an intifada or an uprising. But how far exactly will the authorities here in Gaza will allow people to protest is still not clear. There are a lot of international pressure. As Haniyeh, the head of Hamas here in Gaza, has been summoned to Cairo yesterday for talks, and it seems that Egypt is trying to strongly have an effect or try to talk with Hamas to tune down the tension and try to find a way through. It is a big question about still people don't really recognize what is the deal of the century, what kind of peace are they talking about. But what they know for sure is that they're upset about the situation that has happened this week and the United States move to make its embassy in Jerusalem.
Right, Adel Mahroui is keeping tabs on the violence in Gaza and is joining me there at the Israeli-Palestinian border on the line. But we can now rope in Liling Tang. She's been following all this from New York. Of course, Liling, the death toll, as Adel has mentioned there, is worryingly high. Has there been any reaction from the United Nations? Is the body planning to intervene at all?
Yes, there has been reaction here. We just heard from the daily briefing from the deputy spokesperson Farhan Haq that the Secretary General is very concerned, particularly worried about the news coming out from the Gaza border and the number of people reportedly killed. Now, Haq said that the Secretary General Antonio Guterres called on Israel to calibrate its use of force and minimize the use of live fire, and also cautioned that lethal force should be used only as a last resort when under imminent threat of death or serious injury. And that was his message to the Israeli side. Now, the UN chief's message to the Palestinian side, and he was speaking from Vienna where he is visiting, Antonio Guterres said that Hamas and the leaders of the demonstrations must keep protesters away from the Gaza fence and prevent all violent actions, provocations and attempts to breach the fence. So that was the latest word from the Secretary General. But we also heard from the Palestinian ambassador to the UN, Riyad Mansour, who said that he is seeking a Security Council emergency session anytime within the next 24 hours to discuss what's happening on the Gaza border, but also the opening of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. Now, he says that his country has condemned what Israeli forces are doing to Palestinian civilians along the Gaza border. He wants action from the UN to stop this immediately, and he also wants those responsible brought to justice, which brings me to the question of whether the UN, anyone at the UN, can do something to stop this. There has been talk about undertaking an investigative mechanism to look into the activities, the events over the past few weeks at the Gaza border, but a move to move that along, a vote on that by the Security Council was blocked by the United States back in April as expected. Riyad Mansour said that he is now seeking his colleagues in Geneva are now seeking a separate emergency meeting at the Human Rights Council in order to revisit this proposal for an investigation. But beyond these actions, the UN is really doesn't really have a lot more other options to undertake, given that any action at the Security Council would be blocked by the US, and any move out of the General Assembly would likely just be a symbolic one, like what we saw back in December when a majority of nations opposed the decision by Donald Trump to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. Beatrice?
Well, Lily, you do mention that the UN doesn't really have any other options, but of course there is concern now about what exactly happens to the peace process in the Middle East. What can the UN do, though, to ensure the peace process in the Middle East gets back on track?
Well, the UN under Secretary General Antonio Guterres can continue to exert pressure, try to bring these opposing sides together to mediate or negotiate or resume the Middle East peace process. And also other groups of negotiators like the Middle East Quartet, for example, that involves the European Union, the UN, Russia, as well as the US, they can try to work towards bringing the peace process back on track. But ultimately, though, at the end of the day, the ball is in the United States court. It's in the court of President Donald Trump. The U.S. has always had a leading position as a facilitator of the peace process, and Donald Trump has said that there is a peace proposal in the works. So in terms of trying to get a sense of where we are and when we can resume that peace process, a lot of that will have to depend on what this peace proposal from the White House could look like.
Right, Liling Tang joining us there from New York.